When you sit down to write an essay, do you always get the feeling and you're like, because you don't know what to write about? Hi, I'm Dr. Clay Zuba, inventor of Zubify. When you write literary analysis or rhetorical analysis, it isn't always about understanding everything about that text you're writing about as much as it's knowing how to write about elements in that literary work. Today, I'm going to teach you how to write about imagery, so you can write about imagery no matter where you find it. Yes. When you're assigned a particular text to write about, success is not so much about understanding every word and every nuance in that text as it is about being able to write about parts of it and be able to explain to a reader how they work and how they persuade and how they work toward that work's overall purpose. That's why today I'm going to teach you how to write about imagery, because this is one of the most commonly used literary devices that you'll find in almost everything you read, whether it's fiction, poetry, or nonfiction. So if you can write about imagery, you can write about almost any text that you're assigned to write about. Yes. Whenever you read or hear language that moves you on an emotional level and just really physically immerses you in a scene, it's probably imagery. Imagery is a common element of fiction, it's a primary mode of poetry, and it's an extremely persuasive means of writing nonfiction. For example, take Zora Neale Hurston's story Sweat, when she describes Delia. And she describes Delia having knotty, muscled limbs and harsh, knuckly hands. This language is extremely descriptive on a physical level. I can really imagine Delia's hands in my head. I can imagine her knuckles. I can imagine them showing signs of really rough work, possibly scars, possibly elements of being broken before. I can really imagine the torment that she experienced under the forced labor conditions that she had to work daily. Or take the poem Recuerdo by Edna St. Vincent Millay. Here Millay describes a ferry ride as being bare and bright and smelling like a stable. This language, even though quite simple, still transports me to the scene of that ferry ride, physically. And this is imagery. Imagery is when the writing gives you an extremely strong physical sense of being there in that scene. Today, I'm going to show you a process of comprehending and writing about imagery. When you interpret imagery, it probably happens all in your head at the same time, and it's very hard to explain it to someone else. But you can explain it, and you can explain it in writing if you follow the 4 steps I'm going to teach you about today. When I ask my students what imagery is, their first response is usually that imagery paints a picture in your head. And this is kind of right, but it's also kind of wrong. First of all, just because you have a picture in your head after reading something doesn't necessarily mean that imagery put it there. It just means that maybe imagery put it there, but maybe you also have all kinds of other associations with the text that put this picture in your head that don't even have to do with the text. In order to really understand if imagery is causing this image, you need to analyze the text and see if the language is physically descriptive. Specifically, the language has to evoke one of the 5 senses. I have to be able not necessarily to see it, because having it paint a picture in my head does make me see it, but it might not be painting a picture in my head. It might not be visual imagery. It might be auditory imagery, which is when you can hear it, olfactory imagery, which is when you can smell it, tactile or kinesthetic energy, which is when you can touch it or when you can feel motion, or it could be gustatory imagery, which is when you can taste it. You know you have imagery when you have a sensory description or impression of what you read, or even when you have an absence of a sensory impression. For example, silence is imagery. Even though there's no sound, it's the absence of a sound. It's the sensation of the absence of the sound. So it's imagery, even if there is no sound. But imagery is not an idea or concept. When Lady Gaga says, "I'm an artist and my image is my art," even though she said the word image, there's no imagery because there's no physically descriptive language. When God says in the Bible, he says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them." Again, there's no imagery, even though the word image is here, because there's no physically descriptive language. For some people, imagery works intuitively in their head, and it's easy to interpret the imagery. But this doesn't mean it's easy to write about it. When you think in your head, thinking is often messy and all tangly, and all your ideas gets mixed up to each other. If you try to explain it to someone the way you just interpreted it in your head, it's not going to make any sense because the thinking and the interpreting doesn't happen on a linear level. When you write, you have to write in a more linear way so you can logically explain your thinking to the reader. That's why you have to follow my 4 steps. 1, identify. 2, describe the sensory impression to the reader. 3, describe the emotion or the idea that you get from that sensory impression. 4, consider how this idea or emotion helps the writer convey their idea or persuade the reader. And 5 is finally to write about it. If you follow my 5-step process, you can always write about imagery, whether you're writing for rhetorical analysis or literary analysis or an AP test or an SAT test or just for homework, because you'll always be able to analyze. Yes. Today, I'm going to walk you through 2 examples of imagery, one in poetry, one in nonfiction, so that you understand how to write about both. For poetry, let's go back to our earlier example from Edna St. Vincent Millay. Edna St. Vincent Millay's Recuerdo is a poem about a series of nights spent out in the country and on a ferry between 2 young people in love. In describing this journey and this night, as you can see from this poem, Millay writes, "We were very tired and we were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night on the ferry. It was bare and bright. It smelled like a stable. But we looked into a fire. We leaned across a table." You can see how it goes on. You can read the rest of the poem here if you'd like. But the main thing I wanted to talk about you with is these words, bare and bright and smelled like a stable. I would identify these types of imagery as visual for bare and bright and olfactory for smelled like a stable. The word smell is in this imagery, which gives me a hint that this is about the scent of smell. That's step 1, identify the imagery. It's helpful for you to tell the reader what kind of imagery you're identifying because it helps your reader see specifically what senses you're writing about. And secondly, it also makes sure for you that you're actually writing about actual physically descriptive language rather than just an idea that happens to be in your head for no reason that has anything to do with the text. 2, describe the sensory impression that the imagery evokes. When I think of this night sky, I think of it being open and clear because of the word bare, and I think of it being bright because of the word bright. It's an interesting contradiction here, even though the night sky is bare, that it's bright. It implies that maybe you can't see any stars, but maybe you can't see any stars because it's moonlit and the light is bouncing off the moon or something, but you can't see the moon. I don't know why, but that's the sensory impression I get. And 2, smelled like a stable. Well, I don't know if you've been to a stable lately, but a stable smells like barnyard animals. So it smells like urine and excrement and just like animals laying around, maybe rotting hay. It's not a good smell. This is my sensory impression. 3, describe the emotion or the ideas that are being evoked. When I think of this clear night sky, I think of mystery. I think of openness to experiences. When I think of this smells like a stable, well, that's kind of a euphemism because it describes something that is disgusting in kind of a fun way. So even though it's disgusting, it seems kind of fun. The helpers of the day are Marbles and Lewis. Marbles and Lewis and their sister Powder. We found them in our yard, like when they were 1 week old. We've had them for the past 6 weeks, and we've had to bottle feed them and feed them, take them to the vet and get them cared for, and they're waiting to go to their forever families in about a week. This is how they help best, is when they just are still, because otherwise they would not be helping on this video. They'd be in things. Thanks for helping, Lewis. Thanks for helping, Marbles. 4, purpose. Millay is describing the experience between these 2 young lovers and the way it makes them feel. And my interpretation here is that she's trying to show the way that this night is something special between these two lovers. To me, the purpose here is to depict the innocence and the potential that you feel often like at the beginning of a relationship, and the way it also makes you like kind of want to embrace even the things that you would otherwise maybe be annoyed with or find gross about an experience or about a person, because you're just so enthralled and so caught up in that moment. Now that I've gone through my 4-step process of analyzing, I can write it out. And here's my example of writing. Here you can see what I wrote about this image. Millay employs imagery by juxtaposing the visual phrase bare and bright with the olfactory euphemism smells like a stable to describe the evening shared between the two youths. The phrase bare and bright conjures the image of a clear night sky, while smells like a stable suggests the messiness and uncleanliness of livestock. Combined, these images make the excursion seem carefree and innocent, with limitless potential, evoking the type of night when you're full of boundless joy and accept everything about life, even the unsavory parts, in order to embrace that wonderful moment. You can see here how my written description walked the reader through the thinking that I showed you in my 4-step process. Yes. Now, I told you that you could also write about imagery in prose in basically the same way, and I'll show you an example of writing about nonfiction through Zora Neale Hurston's 1928 essay, How It Feels to Be Colored Me. Since this is nonfiction, this might be the type of essay that you're assigned to write a rhetorical analysis about. Zora Neale Hurston was an important African-American writer, part of the Harlem Renaissance. She wrote How It Feels to Be Colored Me, probably mostly for white audiences. She wanted to reject the prevailing public sentiment that African Americans remain victims of the slavery era, and to represent a different and new sort of racial identity through self-awareness and joy. I mentioned that she's part of the Harlem Renaissance, so, she's part of a movement that was trying to help African American culture be reborn in the United States and to form a new type of African American identity defined by African American people. In the scene that I'm going to write about, Hurston is describing for the reader what they would see if they saw her and a white friend go to see a jazz concert. Hurston writes, "I am in the jungle and living the jungle way. My face is painted red and yellow and my body is painted blue. My pulse is throbbing like a war drum. I want to slaughter something, give something pain. Give death to what? I do not know." If I want to write about this imagery, I would identify this phrase, my face is painted red and yellow and my body is painted blue, is visual imagery. I would identify this phrase, my pulse is throbbing, as tactile imagery, because I can feel that in my veins. I can imagine this. But the phrase like a war drum is auditory imagery, because you hear a war drum. And this phrase, I want to slaughter something, for me, that's all kinds of imagery. It's visual because I think of blood and guts. It's auditory because if you're slaughtering something, there's like a knife or a cleaver hitting flesh, and there's a sound for that. And there's also a feeling for that if you're doing the slaughtering, as well as a feeling for the person or animal being slaughtered. That's step 1. Step 2 is to describe the sensory impression. I can picture the narrator painted in these bright, vivid, contrasting colors. These are primary colors. I can hear this monotonous, steady beat of this war drum in my ears. I can feel a sensation, a monotonous sensation of pulsing, rhythmic in my veins. And I already kind of described to you the mixed sensory impression of the word slaughter. 3, describe the emotion or idea. For me, the imagery invokes a feeling of freedom, power, and uninhibited, vibrant strength. The throbbing for me suggests the pulsing of blood is both a person and in part of a living organism. This is an emotion, then, of connection to life. The word slaughter suggests a potential or willingness for violence, either to protect oneself or to assert dominance in the natural world. 4, purpose. purpose here is to depict an inner experience of being colored or African American, one that wouldn't be visible to her white friend. As part of the Harlem Renaissance, she's trying to show kind of an emerging Pan-Africanism here, and this writing about the throbbing in the veins and the wardrobe is suggesting a primal connection to her African heritage, one that was never conditioned by the white subjugation during slavery. She's using this descriptive language to show the profound experience that she is having from this jazz music that might be invisible to her white friend. The word slaughter is meant to suggest a primitivism that might be different from the more civilized identity that her white friend sees. And finally, write it out. Here's my summation of this 4-step process. You can see how I wrote it out here for you. I don't want to read it to you because that might take too long, but take a minute, pause this video, and give it a read, and you'll be able to see how I'm walking my reader step by step through all the thinking that I just told you. Even though imagery, when you read it, it might appear simple for you to understand in your head, and it doesn't usually take that long for the writer to write it out. But I wanted to show you in this video that if you follow my 4-step process, you can explain it to a reader the way you see it and the way you see it being used to a writer very clearly. But it just might take a lot more thinking and a lot more written space on a page than it seems like it took the writer to do it in the first place. Remember to follow my 4-step process. Identify the imagery, describe the sensory impression you get from the imagery, describe the emotion or idea that you would associate with the imagery, and 4, describe the way that this emotion or idea is connected to the writer's purpose. If you can work out these 4 steps in your head, and if you can write them all out for the reader, then you'll always be able to describe the way imagery works for your reader, whether you're doing literary analysis or rhetorical analysis, and whether you're writing on a time standardized test or whether you're writing for homework, or even if you're writing one day for publication. Yes. And if you follow these steps, you'll always be able to write about imagery no matter what text you're assigned to write about. Thanks for watching Zubify. Come back for more Zubify.